What's up? True Techno Gamer here, back for another video. Once again, I appreciate the support. Please, please, please like, dislike, subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel. It really motivates me to make more content. I really appreciate the support. Continue to do so. Like, subscribe, comment if you can, please. For this video, I want to touch on some of the recent rumors around the PS5 Pro. Honestly, I've made videos already talking about the PS5 Pro from a technology standpoint, like hypothetical. If you haven't seen that, please check that out. But this is more about, just the fact that, it seems like more of a reality. There's rumors hinting at a release date window being end of 2024. Something that's not surprising to me at all. And I kind of alluded to in the past that it wouldn't be 2023. So we hear like the Take-Two boss mentioned it apparently in their earnings call recently, that basically PS5 Pro is coming. Expecting it sometime next year. And then there's been some insiders discussions and leaks around PS5. Coming out 2024 timeframe, being a real thing. And also even mentioned that the dev kits are already not out yet, but are basically going to be sent out in the fall of this year. So obviously, the system needs to pretty much be done at that point, right? What I want to talk about more, just thinking, there's been a lot of discussion around people still saying, like, what's the point of a PS5 Pro? Do we really need a PS5 Pro? The PS5 is still pretty decent, and still hasn't been tapped, hasn't really been had any games yet that's going to see its full potential. So do we really need it? And I want to talk about this in the context of just thinking about what the real use cases are for a PS5 Pro. And from a positioning perspective, to me, what I feel would be the most impactful and meaningful situation where the PS5 Pro, I think, justifies its existence and its purpose. Best case scenario, by 2024, if Sony is able to release something, it's probably going to be, the target that we've been hearing is 2x for raster, 2.5 times for ray tracing, right? So that's best case. 2 times the PS5 in a console form factor with the thermal limitations, the size limitations, and the cost limitations. That's feasible to get a GPU at least that's about 2 times more powerful in that console form factor by the end of 2024 for a reasonable price. That's it, right? You're not going to be able to throw some 4090 in a console and be like, here you go. So what does 2 times look like? 2 times is roughly the 6950 on the AMD side, which is the absolute top of the line pinnacle RDNA 2 card. That's roughly 2 times the PS5 today. And that also corresponds roughly to about a 3090 level on NVIDIA side. So the idea of having a 3090 in a console is pretty freaking sweet when you think about it, right? I mean, that's a lot of GPU power in a dedicated fixed box. Developers can go to town with that. Now, in terms of use cases, well, are we looking for a resolution bump primarily? We're already at 4K. By and large, PS5 is capable of 4K. People want to say, well, it's not a true 4K because a lot of games have to be upsampled or upscaled. That doesn't make the hardware any less true 4K. This is the pet peeve of mine. The PS5 hardware is fully capable of 4K. If games aren't hitting 4K, that's a developer's choice. That's a content, kind of a content thing, not a hardware thing, right? If the game you're building is so advanced and so complex, yeah, every piece of hardware is going to have its limits. You could build something that can't run at 4K on a 4090 today. That doesn't mean a 4090 is not a 4K card. It's fully capable of 4K, and there's a lot of games out there on PS5 that are actually run at 4K. Native 4K in some cases, dynamic 4K, and a lot of others, but plenty of native 4K as well. So we're already there. 8K? Is 8K really worth a new console? Absolutely not. And I think Sony and Microsoft know that, especially 8K, because 8K isn't really taking off in any way, shape, or form, and any there's no line of sight to any time in the near future where 8K is going to be that thing. 4K was clearly, we were ramping up. We saw the world and the industry at large kind of converging on 4K. That's not happening with 8K. 8K is technically out there if you just want to, if you have the money and just want to floss and say, hey, I got a top of the line TV and it has 8K. There's still pretty much no 8K content. Now, gaming can help that, but actually powering games at 8K is still ridiculous. It's still probably out the reach of a PS5 Pro. Frankly, it's out the reach for, all but a 4090 maybe. Like most, even a 4080 and the 7900 are not really pushing 8K, native 8K games at least, in any meaningful way. So that's not worth it for a console, and that's not very practical, okay? So it's not about resolution bump. Is it just about performance? Again, most games on PS5 are already hitting 60 frames. A good number of them are pushing above that, approaching 120, and there are even a number of games already at 120. So, and that's also true for Xbox Series, by the way. So, for most people, performance is in a really good place, right? So here's what I would say: the first use case for a Pro console would be for ray tracing. We're already seeing a lot of cases where games are releasing, developers are trying to design and build around ray tracing, but frankly are running into situations where the consoles aren't powerful enough to really push the level of ray tracing for it to be meaningful. I'll say it like that. Usually on console, you have to scale back the ray tracing quality quite a bit or just remove ray tracing features altogether. We see that a lot. Games like Cyberpunk is a classic example. It has every ray tracing technology under the sun. The console version, I think, only has RT shadows or RTA. I can't even remember. One of the two lightweight shadows, a ray tracing that doesn't really make much of a difference. It's missing the big guns that make the most difference, which I've talked about as well on my channel. If you haven't seen that video about ray tracing, please check it out. But they're missing the big guns like RTGI, the global illumination, which makes a huge impact, and RT reflection, of course. Those are probably the two most impactful ones. So maybe a PS5 Pro now, you could imagine a situation where running at the same general settings of the PS5 can now add, at least GI and reflections, or maybe even some other, RT bits in there as well. Or, maybe add in reflections with increasing the quality and resolution as well. Stuff like that, right? That's the first use case. Ray tracing is definitely going to be a bigger and bigger thing every year. It is the future. Eventually leading to path tracing. It is. The PC is going toward a ray tracing future at breakneck speed. Consoles are lagging behind. So I think Sony and Microsoft have gotten this memo, and this is going to be a big part of the PS6 and Xbox, whatever, later down the road as well. But in the interim, they probably can do something to just give some meaningful boost to RT performance and, make it easier for developers to just kind of design for one level, one feature set. Look at something like The Witcher 3 was missing RT reflections as well on console and had a much lower grade RTGI as well. So stuff like that. Try to keep parity there. I think that's the biggest thing. In a world where a lot of the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more RT ray trace games. Being able to have those on console and really bring ray tracing to the masses, I think is a meaningful thing, especially for the enthusiast crowd. They can appreciate that and can actually see that benefit. The other use case is just generally speaking, just more power, right? But why does that matter? Because as I also talked about before in the channel, the gulf between the PC and console arguably is bigger than ever. Really not even arguably, right? But when you add in, especially when you add in stuff like the DLSS and FSR, DLSS 3, you running 4090 with frame gen, you're talking like over 6 to 8 times the frame rate that you can get on that card versus a PS5. And 3 years in, right? And that, by the way, that card is only not even a year old, right? So we haven't really seen that level of just sheer processing power growth on a PC. Now, granted, everything is kind of hitting a point, we're kind of hitting a wall, so to speak. We're not able to just build a new chip that's 4 times more powerful. But with all of the AI enhancements and all of these other software upgrades and optimizations, we can see performance really get again 6 to 8 easily times faster. Even though the raw throughput natively is for 4090 is still roughly only about maybe 3x of PS5. But when you add in all the other stuff, yeah, you can start hitting way above that, right? That's huge, guys. I mean, a game that's struggling to run at 60 FPS on a console can easily be running at, you can imagine like 400 FPS, right, on a 4090 level card, top line today. So closing that gap, I think, is useful again for developers' sake too, just so they can again start developing to one feature set and one SKU. Yeah, there's still going to be a PS5 version, but they can just kind of dial down some settings, ideally. Of course, Sony and Microsoft would want to make it easy as possible for developers to take advantage of whatever these pro systems have. But really, it's about closing the gap. Now, realistically, a 3090-ish level, in 2024 is going to be decidedly mid-range by that point, because by that point, we're talking NVIDIA's 5000 series cards and AMD's RDNA 4 cards. So 3090 today is still pretty high end, kind of like on the upper mid to lower high end, I guess, range. By the next generation GPU cycle, yeah, 3090 level would be pretty mid range, right? So that's fine, right? Because again, it's a console, it's more optimized, closed box, etc. But that's the reality of the situation. That's what it's going to look like. So when I say close the gap, I mean that's still closing the gap. You're 2x over the PS5. You're doubling up the performance. You are closing the gap, but you're not going to be. There's no way that Sony can do that without releasing a console for $1,000, right? They're not going to be at the absolute bleeding edge, of course, at the top of the food chain, but they'll close the gap, and I think that's still a valuable thing to do. Now, from a messaging standpoint, what does it look like if you're a consumer? What would it take for you to kind of want to say, okay, I want to get a PS5 Pro? Is it enough to say that this box is 2 times faster than the PS5? I don't think so, right? Especially if it's more expensive than the PS5, which I'm sure it will be. What does that two times more faster even look like? Again, you got PS5 games now. The next gen games will probably be running at 1440p 30. Games like Plague's Tale, games like Jedi Fallen Order, stuff like that, even though it's not even native for 1440p. But, I digress. But 1440p 30 on a PS5 can now be 4K 30, like a native 4K 30, or maybe be 1440p 60. So the performance mode can go from maybe 1080p 60 to now 1440p 60. All of these P's and numbers, who cares? Like, most of the mass market people that play on console, that aren't the super geeks, the PC elitists, all of that kind of stuff, they don't care and know. How would they even know? That the resolution went from 1080p to 1440p. Just by looking, they don't care. They're just playing the game. They're just playing Call of Duty online. They're playing NBA 2K. They're playing Madden and whatever, FIFA. I mean, they don't care. Does it feel cool? Does it look good? Is it clear? Yeah, fine. You go from 1440p to 4K. Whoop-de-doo. Is it a little clearer now? Yeah. But that's not very compelling. That's kind of what we saw with the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. That's not, to me, very compelling. I think to most people. So that's not enough. Now, saying, again, you now can have ray tracing feature that you could not have on the old systems, that's kind of compelling. Again, for people that know and care about ray tracing, that's pretty compelling. Here's the real kicker, though. This is where I go from practical. I think everything I said up to this point is pretty practical. What a PS5 Pro and Xbox Series XL, whatever, what that practically could be, right? Roughly 2 times GPU, obviously faster CPU, overclock, new CPU like they probably use Zen for at least. So a lot of IPC, so much better just CPU performance across the board. Probably not more cores because that makes development harder, and that's not meaningful. Maybe a little bit more RAM, 16 gigs, maybe 20, maybe 24, but I think probably 20. Maybe a little bit more RAM, and that's that's it. There's your Pro. Now, from a use case perspective, and from a messaging perspective, I think the most powerful thing that Sony can do here is to add some level, some way of doing reconstruction for resolution and frame boosting. So imagine where you have a PS5 Pro that has some hardware maybe or some software, some tools to maybe do some AI enhanced super res scaling. And obviously won't be DLSS. It won't be FSR necessarily. Maybe Sony has their own. This isn't completely out of left field, right? And I'll tell you why in a second. But maybe Sony has their own kind of upsampling that can be universal for all games running on the system. That would be the real way to do it, right? If it's like an OS level feature, a system level feature that can be toggled, user can take, enable, super res. Every game that comes out, whatever the native res is, the game runs at 1080p, but the system is doing a smart, upscaling that is, makes it look pretty good at 4K on a 4K screen or an 8K screen, right? And then have some way of doing frame boost. We see this to some extent now. A rudimentary version of this is kind of like the black screen insertion feature that you see on a lot of modern TVs. Xbox has what they call FPS boost, I believe, which they take like older Xbox games and push them to 120 FPS, stuff like that. I would liken this something more to what the PSVR does and PSVR 2 does, right? They have, a native 120 hertz screen, and all of the PSVR even 1 games, some of them ran at 60 native, but the headset ultimately still interpolated things so that you saw 120 when you were looking at it. PSVR 2 does something very similar. So I think something like that would be powerful. Again, if you're running on a 120 hertz monitor, let's say, or monitor TV, the system can basically detect that, try to do some frame interpolation. It obviously won't be as advanced as something like DLSS 3 frame gen necessarily, but something akin to just kind of like a booster that where, you feel the additional smoothness, right? Now, the combination of those two things could be super powerful for a console. The message there in the back of the box says, play all PlayStation 5 games at up to 8K 60 or 4K 120, right? That kind of thing. Basically, getting the utmost, and again, doing it in a more sophisticated workaround-ish way, right? Hacky way, I guess you could say. Because it's not feasible to do it in a native way, right? So this is kind of like the new age version of what the checkerboard rendering was for PS4 Pro. But that's a powerful statement if they can achieve it. Now, why did I say this isn't coming out all out of left field? Because over the last few years, we've seen a ton of patents from Sony indicating that they are working on some kind of tech to do exactly this kind of thing. They're working on different tech to do the texture remastering on the fly, so taking in older, lower res textures and being able in runtime to update them and make them look, better and more high res. We've seen stuff like that. We've seen stuff around the PSVR 2 patents and the frame interpolation stuff. This isn't like completely out of left field tech. This stuff, to some extent, already exists, right? We've seen patents about Sony working on some kind of upscaling, some kind of reconstruction technology that there is their own. There have even been rumors around the PS5 Pro indicating that was going to be a key part of it, that Sony was working on some kind of reconstruction tech that would be made available starting with the PS5 Pro. So this isn't out of left field, but what I'm just saying is, if you think about that, I think that's probably the most compelling story that Sony and Microsoft could come up with for a enhanced console and a mid-gen refresh, right? To just say it's all about the numbers, right? The PC crowd that we're trying to keep up with, if you're Sony and Microsoft, are all about the numbers and all about the, the frame rates and resolution. So if you could legitimately say, again, ideally this isn't practical probably for a lot of reasons, but if it could be a system feature, because every game individually, it might not work, just simply might not work for a lot of games. But if they could do it at a system level and just flip a toggle and say every game can now run up to 4K 120 and 8K 60. That's your way of being able to take advantage of 8K screens, by the way, for those that have, the few that have 8K displays. And that's a way to really push every game up. You got games now that work on PS5, especially the newer gen games like the Witcher 3 remake, like I mentioned, Jedi Survivor, recently, maybe even upcoming games like Final Fantasy and Spider-Man 2, who knows, right? But that are only running at, in some cases, sub 1080p natively. You know, sub 1080p, can't maintain 60 FPS in the case of Jedi Survivor. Witcher 3 can't maintain 30 with the RT that they have. So again, you have a lot more native power to really scale things up. But then you can also just say, you know what? Imagine Witcher 3 can run on PS5 Pro, maybe natively at native 4K 30, something around there, right? Or can run at a upscaled or reconstructed 4K 60. Pretty powerful, I think, right? Or 8K 60, 4K 120, whatever. So I'm just throwing it out there. Do not be surprised. Again, this stuff is out there. This stuff is already being used in some cases by Sony. And they've been working on something that we haven't seen yet around this stuff. So, again, RT improvements, being able to have new RT features that the base console can't have, that is part of the story, I think. And then potentially having some way intelligently, whether it's AI enhanced or not, maybe some machine learning involved or not, but having some way to reconstruct and push games to higher levels of fidelity and higher frame rates. I think that both of those things are a safe bet. How they do it and how widespread it would be is the question. Ideally, it would be pretty much available to every PS5 game, ideally. But we'll see. We'll see. But that's the case for a PS5 Pro, and that's why it's going to happen. I, for one, applaud if Sony does come out with one that's like $799. That's the rumors, because that just means that they're trying to push. It's going to take that push to get something that is meaningfully above and beyond the PS5. Right? You need at least that 2x and 2.5x for RT to say that it's worth it. And that's about as high as you're going to get. Like I said, the 4090 is only about 3x in terms of raw performance. You're not going to get anywhere near that given the size of that card and the power draw of that card, et cetera, et cetera. Looking at AMD side, even the 7900X TX, it's not practical, right? It's still 300 plus watts. It's still $1,000 card on its own. Not practical. You might be able to see something closer to what the 7800 may be, in a mobile form factor, on the next gen PS5 Pro. And then that would be, again, kind of equivalent to a top of the line RDNA 2 card, or a 6900, 6950 level. I think that still be a great thing. That'll still be able to give you a meaningful experience improvement for sure. Just got to see it, how sophisticated and how widespread it will be. Either way, PS5 Pro, expect to hear more about it soon, and I will absolutely expect to see it next year, 2024. That's all for now, though. Again, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think, please. True Techno Gamer. Till next video, signing off.